Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Benchwarmers Sports Talk podcast. And welcome to the Seattle Kraken expansion draft special. We'll go over some of the big players left unprotected, some surprising names, some unsurprising names, and go over who we think could be some certain players that Seattle are going to look to select. As always, I'm Labi and I'm joined with Jacob. Jacob, how are you doing? Are you excited for the expansion draft?
Yeah, no, it's always fun to see a new team come in and see other players get picked, but obviously from our favorite teams, they're gonna have to take a player, so that's gonna suck.
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously excitement, but also not excited at the same time. Like you said, every team except for Vegas losing a player, and obviously that is never easy, especially with certain teams. They're going to lose some pretty talented players, and I think Toronto and Pittsburgh are two teams in that category that are definitely going to be missing someone valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that an expansion draft really goes to show, what can teams do with adversity when you take a good player away from their team. So it'll be very interesting to see who Seattle takes and what their roster will look like in 2 days.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into that, I think that there's a couple of quick points to discuss, which is there are some trades that were made ahead of the protection lists going on. So, for those of you who do not know, the Seattle Kraken are joining the NHL as the 32nd NHL team, and they get to do an expansion draft. So, every team gets to protect a certain number of players, and then Seattle gets to pick one unprotected player from each team. And so because of that expansion draft process, the protected players lists came out on Sunday. And following that, there was a roster freeze on Saturday because of that. So no trades, no signings, nothing can be done from Saturday afternoon onwards to after the expansion draft, which is happening Wednesday night, I believe.
It's tomorrow night, yeah.
Yeah, tomorrow night. So, because of that, there were some trades being made in order to protect certain players, not protect certain players. The Suter and Parise buyouts, for example, that was done so that Minnesota would be able to protect Matt Dumba, amongst other reasons. And that was evident. And there were a couple of big trades. The Vancouver Canucks acquiring Jason Dickinson for a third-round pick from Dallas. The San Jose Sharks acquire Aiden Hill from the Arizona Coyotes. The Vegas Golden Knights pick up Brett Howden. The Flyers pick up Ryan Ellis. And Vegas picks up Nolan Patrick. And the Predators acquire Philippe Myers and Cody Glass. And then Arizona... Well, I won't say Arizona acquires Andrew Ladd. More so, the New York Islanders dump Andrew Ladd's contract, and because Arizona is acquiring that contract, pick up 2 second-rounders and a third. And then, of course, we have the Penguins and Leafs, our two teams trading with each other. The Leafs acquiring Jared McCann for Philip Hallander and a 7th-rounder. Your thoughts on any and all of those trades?
Well, that was a lot of trades. I thought the funniest was when Kroner, I believe, is the goaltender for San Jose, who they signed with like a day before he traded. He's not going anywhere. We signed him to a deal, and then the next day he's like, yeah, we acquired Aiden Hill for this guy. I thought that was kind of funny. That's such a San Jose thing to move, but I think the big winner is the Leafs. I think the Leafs fleeced Pittsburgh once again.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I think this is going to be a talking point later when we talk about who Seattle might pick from the Leafs. But yeah, I hate this trade. So basically, Pittsburgh weren't going to protect Jared McCann, which, one, doesn't make sense to me. Like, Jared McCann should be protected. The fact that we're not protecting him and we're protecting a 36-year-old Jeff Carter instead doesn't make any sense to me. Like, sure, Carter's a great player. He scored a lot of goals once we traded for him. And yeah, I do understand, like, if we trade for a player and then lose him in expansion, that kind of sucks because we gave up that third-round pick for essentially nothing considering we got bounced in the first round. But a young player, like a 24-year-old like Jared McCann, who's on an RFA contract, so you have control over him, that's way more valuable in my mind. And to flip him for Hallander, a player who we drafted and then traded to Toronto in the Phil Kessel trade, and a seventh rounder is irrelevant. So we basically just dumped McCann for nothing. Now, I understand the logic is, well, at least you got something in return. It's better than losing him for nothing. But the reality is, now that we don't have McCann anymore, Seattle are going to take a different player from us. And I'd honestly rather Seattle take McCann for nothing than lose McCann for essentially nothing in a trade and now lose another player on top of that. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't feel like Hallander is enough of a prize where I would have rather just lost McCann to Seattle, because now we lost McCann for Hallander and we're going to lose another player. So for me, losing McCann and Zach Aston-Reese, or McCann and Marcus Pettersson, and all we have to show for it is a seventh rounder and Philip Hallander, it's terrible asset management on behalf of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And this is the first real big decision that Hextall and Burke are making, and I think they've missed they failed.
I agree. I think Dubas really kind of finessed the Penguins again, and Jared McCann probably won't get picked up. And so now we have see. This is probably why McCann was brought in, because I think Dubas knew that Kerfoot was going to get picked up, and now you need that third line center is gone, and that's exactly what McCann can bring. So I think what Dubas did doing this was exactly what he needed to do, and exactly how he did it. I don't exactly know how he did that, but basically he just flipped the guy you gave us and basically got McCann for nothing, which is excellent, and I'm very happy with this trade. And I think it's a really huge depth part for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, you see, I respectfully disagree with you in the sense of I still think the Seattle will take McCann over Kerfoot, but your larger point is still very true, because the point is Seattle can only take one player. So you're giving up Hallander and a seventh round pick, which isn't a lot, and you're going to ensure that either McCann or Kerfoot will be on your team next year. So like you said, you still have that third line center role going forward, and obviously Dubas is comfortable with that being either McCann or Kerfoot. If he loses one, he knows he keeps the other. And so, yeah, I think we talk about this whole term of asset management, and I think that's great asset management from Toronto. A seventh round pick isn't a very valuable pick, and Philip Hallander, sure, I think he was a second round pick, but he's not played in North America yet, and I believe he's already 24 years old.
Yeah, I believe so. He's getting up there. He's getting pretty old.
Yeah, so that's a player that I don't mind. If I'm Toronto, I don't mind losing that type of prospect, if you can even call him a prospect at 24 years old anymore, in order to ensure that we have a third line center, because obviously we know Toronto is, or at least trying to be in win now mode, and are definitely trying to go all in. So yeah, I think that's a great play. You talk about the San Jose trade. That's done because Arizona protecting Darcy Kemp. They have Kemper, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're protecting Darcy Kemper in the expansion draft, which meant that Aiden Hill was going to be left unprotected. San Jose is not protecting Martin Jones, so they acquire a young goalie in Aiden Hill that they obviously trust will play for them, and now obviously they acquire Aiden Hill to protect him. Seattle aren't going to take Martin Jones, because I don't know why the fuck you would ever take Martin Jones.
Absolutely.
But
yeah, he's kind of overrated, has been since 2016.
The other big deal is I was shocked to see that Ryan Ellis trade happen. Vegas pick up Nolan Patrick. Now he's a guy who he was of course a second overall pick, second overall, and just has not reached his potential, partially due to some very bad injuries that he had to suffer through. But Philadelphia, like we talk about, they made the conference finals, I believe it was 2 seasons ago, and then missed the playoffs last year. Just had an awful season. Philadelphia obviously trying to go back all in, picking up. In my mind, Ryan Ellis is one of the more underrated defenders in the NHL. So as much as I hate the Flyers, I think this is a great move for them, picking up a proven defenseman in Ryan Ellis. And for Vegas, I think they're just taking a shot that a change of scenery and going to a new team might be what Nolan Patrick needs. And I mean, to be fair to Vegas, we've seen this happen numerous times. A young player doesn't reach his potential, gets moved to another team, and then finally reaches that potential. And then for Nashville, obviously this is a team that is rebuilding. Philippe Myers is a young defenseman. Cody Glass is a young forward. They're both pretty young, both have decent potential. It's clearly a move for the future. What are your thoughts on that big trade?
Yeah, I think it's a great trade for all teams. I think it was smart. I think it was smart that they did a three-way trade instead of a two-way trade, and they sent all these young prospects to the teams that are looking to rebuild, and they sent Ellis to a team that maybe can contend back in the Metro next year. I think it's a great deal for all teams. I really do, and I don't think it's hard to I think it's not hard to argue that um that all these players are going to probably do pretty well. I honestly think that the younger guys, um, Glass and Patrick, are going to do probably better than I think Ellis will. But I still think Ellis is that key piece that Philadelphia was needed. They had Gostisbehere, who was like on waivers, and I don't really know who else is on their defensive core, which goes to say like they needed someone. And I guess picking Ellis up, like you said, one of the most underrated defensemen in the league. Hopefully that'll give him a spark and bring that veteran presence because Alice has been to the finals before. Did it in 2017, so he knows what it's like to go the distance. So it'll be good to see for sure exactly what Philadelphia does with Alice this year.
Yep. And then the last big deal is not so much the trade, but the signing that's reportedly happening. So Barclay Goodrow is a unrestricted free agent, but free agency doesn't start until July 28th.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the player's rights, so if he's technically on your roster on an expiring contract, you have the right to negotiate a contract with him before free agency opens. So the Rangers give the Tampa Bay Lightning a seventh rounder in order to acquire Barclay Goodrow's signing rights, and now reports is that they have agreed to terms on a 6-year deal worth, I think it was 3.5 or 3.25, around $3 million a year.
3.6.
There you go, 3.6, so even more than 3.5. I don't mind the trade. Like we said, seventh rounders are pretty much useless. You can just sort of throw them around. I don't care if my team gives up a seventh rounder. My concern is Barclay Goodrow. Look, he's the type of player you need on a winning team, so I don't disagree with the Rangers, who are obviously trying to build a championship team. I don't disagree with them wanting to acquire this type of player, but he's a bottom six winger. You don't tie up bottom six wingers to 6-year contracts, and you don't tie up bottom six wingers to $3.6 million a year. So I'm shocked. I think this is a terrible signing. I'm interested to see what you think about it.
I agree. I don't think it was a very good signing. And we look at the other people that were signed around the same. We look at Chris Dreda, who's apparently going to make a deal with Seattle, and it's a 3x3.5 for Chris Dreda, who's arguably better than Goudreau. Obviously, it's hard to say, they play different positions, but I think Goudreau succeeded so well is because he was on such a successful Tampa Bay team. Like, this is a brand new Seattle team. No one has any expectations for them, especially after Vegas. No one believes Lightning can strike twice. Little Tampa Bay right there. But, yeah, I don't think it's a good deal. I really don't. I would like to see what the Rangers are able to do with him. Maybe they brought him for power play purposes, penalty kill purposes. Maybe it's like a kind of an insurance marker, but I wouldn't sign him for 6 years, 3.6. Like, that just makes no sense to me. I think if it was like 3x3.6, fine, or like 2x3.6, okay, I can understand that. Get like a rental, see how he goes out for the year. But yeah, six is a long time, and we talk about how long contracts usually aren't the best kind of contracts to make, as obviously they regress, but I guess we'll have to see how that plays out for New York, especially for a team who's got lots of expectations this year to make the playoffs.
Absolutely, and I think it's another key point is a lot of the Rangers' best players are young, and they'll have expiring contracts. So you've committed 6 years now to that $3.6 million, and I know we've repeatedly talked about the New York Rangers salary cap situation, because we've talked about how they could potentially be in the running for a Jack Eichel trade or this free agency signing or this trade and that trade, because here are all of the players that they will need to re-sign in the next 3 years on restricted free agency. Capo Caco, Alexis Lafreniere, Julian Gauthier, Pavel Buchnevich, Philip Hedl, Adam Fox, Keandre Miller, Libor Hayek, Alexander Georgiev, and Igor Shesterkin.
And
all of those players.
I have a feeling whoever they lose to the expansion draft is going to be a big part of that rebuild. So,
and I mean, they do have $23 million in cap space. But the point is, if you're committing 3.6 over the next 6 years, you're not going to be able to get all of those guys onto a contract, especially because a lot of those players are on entry-level contracts. Alexis Lafreniere, I mean, sure, we're speculating because he didn't have the best rookie season, but he's a first overall pick. You'd imagine he would pick up his performance. He's making $925,000 a year. In 2 years when that contract expires, he's making a lot more than that. And I think an even better example is a guy like Adam Fox. Adam Fox literally just won the Norris Trophy. We're talking about an elite defender. He's making $925,000 this year. He's next season, and then he's a restricted free agent. You think a guy who has literally proven himself to be one of the top defensemen in the league, he's going from $900,000 to $9 million in a year.
Yeah.
The Rangers can't afford to be dishing out $3.6 million contracts to their bottom six when they literally have like Norris Trophy winning defensemen like just sitting there like ready to be given a massive increase in salary.
But maybe the Rangers look at a contract like Doughty and Carlson, and maybe they're like, maybe we don't make the same mistake as that. And maybe we sign him to maybe like 9 million, sure, but maybe only 4 or 5 years. Because we look at the Doughty, we look at the Carlson, we look at the Burns, like these are all Seabrook, even like these contracts that are long term for defensemen, it's not good. So yeah, maybe they'll have to pay 8-9 million, but if they're smart, they won't do it for 8-9 years. Maybe they'll do it for 5 at most, which would be the smart thing in my opinion.
Definitely. I think it'll be shocking for them. Like, I don't think they'll have the space. Like, obviously they'll prioritize signing a guy like Fox and a guy like Capo Caco and a guy like Alexis Lafreniere. But I think some of these other type of players, some of these other young players that they have are going to be on the outside looking in. And the last thing the Rangers want is to not be able to give a contract to a Keandre Miller, who I'm a huge fan of Keandre Miller. I thought he had a phenomenal season. I think part of the reason why Adam Fox was able to win the Norris is because he had Keandre Miller as the defensive partner for most of the season. And the last thing you want is to be unable to sign a guy like that because you've committed so much money to your bottom six guys. The Leafs are not because they've committed money to the bottom six, but they're in a very similar situation where they're going to lose a talented player in Zach Hyman because they don't have the money. Now, at least with the Leafs, the money that they've invested is in their star players, right?
Mm-hmm.
The last thing you want to do, like imagine how frustrating it would be if you're like a Leafs fan where you can't sign Zach Hyman because you still have like Patrick Marleau's $5 million contract on the books, right? That becomes insanely frustrating. So I 100% see this coming back to bite the Rangers.
I mean, absolutely, but like we'll have to see how this plays out because we should kind of get onto the expansion draft now.
Absolutely. I was going to say, so now we'll move on to sort of what's going on in the expansion. So my question to you is, how do you want to do this? Do you want to go team by team?
Let's go team.
Or do you want to go
team by team? Let's go team by team with Anaheim. Who do you think Seattle's going to take and why?
Okay, so with Anaheim, well, in the expansion that I did, I have them picking Danton Heinen.
Mm-hmm.
I could also see them taking Sonny Milano.
Right, and I think those are two excellent choices. I actually have them taking Adam Henrique. I think Henrique has just been on a poor Anaheim team for so long, but I think he's got a lot of potential.
I was looking at that as well. I just think with his cap hit of $5.8 million and his expiry back in 2024, where he will be, I think, 34 years old at the time, mm-hmm. I think that there are other players. I think it's definitely an option. I ended up picking some other big-name players later on some other teams,
Fair.
which is why I avoided Enrique. But I could definitely see that being an option. Definitely that they could explore. I think that there's a lot of different ways Seattle could go with my expansion draft with the players that I picked.
Hmm.
I definitely have them prioritizing younger players and cap space. So I have two sort of different, very similar versions where they have a $71 million cap hit and a $66 million cap hit. So definitely prioritizing cap space with my expansion draft, just because the last thing you want as Seattle is to pick a bloated contract to help out a team. And I'm not saying Enrique's a bloated contract. I just think
Right.
$5.8 million a year when he's 33, 34 starts to look like a worse deal.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. Like, the only reason I picked him was because he's been on like winning teams in his career, and he obviously knows how to win. So that's the only reason why I
Very
picked
true.
him.
Went to the finals with New Jersey, if I remember
I
correctly.
mean, he made like one of the greatest goals of all time in overtime.
That's right. He scored the winning goal in the Eastern Conference Finals that year.
Yeah, against the Rangers.
Yep. All right. Moving on to Arizona. Who do you think?
I actually have them picking Christian Fischer. Christian Fischer's
We're on the same page. We're on the same
is a
page.
very good contract for any team, and I think he's been really underrated for the Arizona Coyotes. I think that if they realize if they're able to realize exactly how good his potential is, I think they'll take him.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Another player I was potentially looking at is Tyler Steenbergen.
Yeah, he's pretty good
Um,
too.
as a young option. But yeah, I think Christian Fischer, like you said, it's perfect. He can slot into the bottom six right away
Hmm.
and contribute year one. He's got 1 year left at only $1 million, which, like you said, contract wise is a steal. And also, he's got a restricted free agency expiry, which is really important. When you look at once again, how I prioritize this expansion draft is youth, but also wanting player control. There's no point in picking players whose contracts are going to expire right away and just go to free agency. If you have a restricted free agent, then you're essentially still in control. Still a trade asset. You can re-sign them yourselves. You can trade them elsewhere, and their rights are still valuable. So completely on the same page with you with Christian Fischer. Now, I'll lead the way with Boston next.
Okay.
Boston for me was very interesting because there are some very interesting options. Do you go with a guy like Andre Kasha, who's on an expiring contract, but it's a restricted free agency deal, so you could sign him? Do you go with a guy like Curtis Lazar, or do you go with a Sean Corrali? But in my mind, I think that what they should do is take one of their young defensemen, either Connor Clifton, Jeremy Lauzon, or Jacob Zaboral. In my opinion, I rate Jeremy Lauzon the highest, so I picked Lauzon.
I was gonna say Connor Clifton. I think you can go between one of the two there. But yeah, I think they should go after the defenseman because there's plenty of forwards out there in the expansion draft that they can go after that have just as much potential. So yeah, I think going Connor Clifton could be a key part of a quote unquote rebuild or just making that team a playoff contending team.
Absolutely. I think Clifton is a great option. Like I said, for me, it was between Clifton and Lausanne. Both of those players can contribute either as a third pairing defenseman, potentially a seventh defenseman, and they're both young. Clifton has $1 million, 2 years left, and then is a UFA. Jeremy Lauzon has 1 year left at $850,000, and then is then an RFA. I think I lean towards Lauzon because of the restricted free agency versus unrestricted. But with Connor Clifton, you have him for 2 years, and then you could definitely still prioritize re-signing him, even though he's an unrestricted free agent. And I definitely agree with you. I think there are less options on defense than there are on offense over the entire list of unprotected players. So prioritizing defense when you can, I think, is an important strategy.
Oh, absolutely, especially because defense wins championships, right? We've seen it multiple times.
Of course. I'll let you take the lead in Buffalo. Unfortunately, you have to pick a player from Buffalo. So
It's got to be
who are
Jeff
you
Skinner.
leaning
It's got to be
towards?
Jeff Skinner. No, I'm just kidding. Not Jeff Skinner. No way in a million years. Um, I think either Cody Eakin or Colin Miller. I think Cody Eakin has shown flashes of greatness, and I think Colin Miller. Again, we talk about defense being so scarce, and it's hard to find good talent. Colin Miller is a good defender. Um, he just plays on Buffalo. So that's probably the biggest problem with Miller. But yeah, Cody Eakin has shown flashes of greatness. I think he could be a bottom six, if not, if he like has what William Karlsson did with Vegas and goes from bottom 6 to top 2, top 1, top 5, like I think it's possible because there's no expectations, and I think that's why the young guys are going to benefit from being pulled to an expansion team is because there's no expectation. So I think that's what's going to happen. It's going to be Miller or Eakin.
Yeah, I can definitely see Eakin being taken as like a fourth line center veteran presence type of guy. I kind of went off the board here. I went William Borgen.
Oh, he went way off the
Uh,
board.
yeah, just because I don't think they're going to find a player on Buffalo who can fit into their roster. Which, I mean, I'd say no disrespect to Buffalo, but like a kind of complete disrespect. Like they're the worst team in the NHL. Not once again, not any. I think Colin Miller could definitely slot into the defense. I don't like that cap hit, and like I said, I've been kind of with this
Sure.
team. I've been prioritizing cap space. I think that if they do value Colin Miller as a potential top 4 defenseman in their lineup, they could definitely go that direction. So I definitely don't think it's a bad pick. I just think William Borgen. Some Buffalo Sabres reporters have been saying that he's actually. I know he's 24 years old, and you're not really a prospect once you start to get towards that age, but they say that he is very close to taking that next step in towards the NHL, and so I think
Yeah, but
it
hold
might be
on.
a pick for Seattle to look towards the future.
These are also the Buffalo reporters who put Seattle ahead of Buffalo in the NHL standings.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's also probably fair because if I look at the team that I've assembled, I think that this Seattle team I've assembled was better than Buffalo. I think they're probably better than Detroit. I think they're better than a couple of teams.
I think Detroit's got a bright future. It's just going to take a few years to get there.
Oh no, definitely a bright future. I think Detroit 5-year outlook is one of the best outlooks in the NHL. I'm just talking purely going into next season. I think Seattle honestly could be a playoff team because remember they're also playing in a very weak Pacific Division.
That's true. It's
Moving
it's
on to Calgary. Oh,
um
sorry. Unless you have
no. That
last point.
I was just going to say you're absolutely right. We saw what Vegas did in that first year. Now we can see Seattle do it again.
Absolutely, especially because that Pacific Division is actually dog water. Like
Yeah,
it's shit.
all the California teams are awful. Um, and then
A lot of
Arizona,
the Pacific Northwest teams are awful. Or sorry,
Edmonton's
Pacific,
not.
like the Canadian teams.
Yeah, Edmonton's overrated. Vancouver's not as good as people think, and Calgary's going to lose their. We'll speak about Calgary about who they're going to lose. Lab, take it away.
Yeah, I don't want to really go too in depth on this. It's Mark Giordano.
Yeah.
They're going to name him the first captain of the team. He's still capable of contributing. They need that leadership presence. They need that top 2 defensive presence. It's not long ago this guy was in contention for winning Norris trophies. It's a very simple pick.
I don't think he's going to be captain of that team. I think they'll go a first year without having a captain, but he's definitely a great. He's been captain most of his career, so I could definitely see him. If they do have a captain, he would be, but I just don't think they'll have one.
Yeah, that's true. They might not. I think if they were to name one initially, though, it would go to Giordano. But you're right. That's typically been the trend of not naming captains. So actually, I wouldn't be surprised. You're probably right on that, where they won't go captain off the bat, but de facto leader of the dressing room. Let's say then.
Right.
Do you want to go into Carolina?
I think they're going to pick Jake Gardner. Now I know.
Wow.
Here's why. Here is why. Now I know Jake Gardner gets a lot of hate and slander because in the playoffs he doesn't perform, but he will get you to the playoffs. He's an excellent defender, and he could be your top pairing. He's used to the minutes. He's played under pressure in Toronto. Now imagine he goes to a team that has no expectations. Like he's in Carolina, which has actually he's been a healthy scratch multiple times. He can get you to the playoffs. That wasn't the problem in Toronto. He was a great season player. He was excellent. It's the playoffs that matter. But I think with Mark Giordano on that second pairing with him, I think that he can, Giordano be able to help calm Gardner down and get his nerves under control. So I think they'll pick Jake Gardner.
I just think that $4 million cap hit, it's calling out to me. And also, I see Nino Niederreiter, and I don't see how you can say no to Nino Niederreiter.
I just think it's the defense that's so scarce. So Gardner has been proven to be a seasoned defenseman. So that's the only reason I say Gardner over Niederreiter.
That's definitely true. I'm looking at the defensemen on my team, and I think it's definitely an option. They could take Jake Gardner. Jesus. They could definitely take Jake Gardner. I think if they were to go defenseman, they'd be better off taking Jake Bean as like a young prospect who's like right there on taking the next step into the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
I see Nino Niederreiter. I mean, granted, there's only 1 year left on his deal at 5.25. Maybe they won't like that. They'll like Jake Gardner having that extra year on his contract, and that might be appealing to them. But I just don't see there aren't many players who are available that you can slot into your top six and you can expect to score 30 goals or put up close to a point per game. I think Nino Niederreiter's an easy 60, 70 point guy, and so I don't see how you can say no to that.
No, absolutely. I mean, I just think the defense, like you said, Bean is a pretty great young defenseman too. I just think the defense are so hard. It's like hard to find really good defensemen. So that's the only reason why I'm saying Gardner.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a very real option in play for Seattle. Moving on to Chicago, for me, there aren't really any great options here, so I would pick either Adam Gaudette or Josh Dickinson. They're two young centers. They're both expired contracts, but restricted free agency. You could sign them to like a cheap two-way deal, under $1 million. For me, it's whoever the Seattle Scouts value as having more potential. I personally lean Adam Gaudette, but I'm not an NHL scout, so knowing whoever Seattle values most in that situation. But I would say either Gaudette or Dickinson. I'd pick Gaudette.
I'd say Gaudette, to be honest with you. I think he's shown he's got, like I said, flashes of brightness, of brilliance. So yeah, I'd go Gaudette in this one. It's hard because Chicago doesn't really have as much talent as they used to have. So I would say Gaudette. I'd say I think that's a safe pick to pick.
Yeah, and like we both said, that's definitely one of those sort of depth prospects building for the future, because Seattle are picking 30 players, and you're only going to have 20 in your lineup. You're only going to have 23 on your NHL roster, so you definitely don't pick. You're not picking only a team of NHL ready players. You do need some of those younger guys thinking towards the future.
Absolutely. So in Colorado, it's a good one. Colorado's got some great players they have to expose.
There's some options. What are you thinking?
I'm gonna go Jonas Donskoy because he's a power play maniac, and he was absolutely incredible for the Avalanche this season. Like if they don't pick Donskoy, they'll pick Comfer because both of them are excellent players. Like I know that at the Avalanche they're gonna lose someone really good, which really sucks, but honestly, I do like how the Avalanche are protecting Logan O'Connor instead of Comfer or Donskoy because he's younger and he's a good prospect who can, really get developed under McKinnon. You could also take Landeskog, and then sign him to a deal then because there's a whole issue of him not getting enough money there. So he may actually be a good choice, but then again, you talk about the cap and he wants $8-9 million, and that's just not attractive.
Yeah, I've agreed with you on this one. I've also gone Donskoy. I think Confer's another slot, literally identical to what you just said. So I'll speak to the Gabriel Landeskog situation. I think it is definitely something that you have to consider if you're Seattle. If Seattle have not at least engaged in preliminary conversations with Landeskog over a contract, I think that that's a mistake on their part. But like you said, you're looking for a guy who wants $8 or $9 million, and this is no disrespect to Gabriel Landeskog. Obviously, he's the captain of that team, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so he's the captain of that team. Obviously, he's part of that trio with Rantanen and McKinnon. And he's a tremendous player in his own respect, but I don't think he's worth $8 or $9 million. And I think that he will not struggle in terms of be a bad player, but I think he won't be the same player away from Rantanen and McKinnon.
Yeah, 100%. You take away, we know McKinnon and Rantanen have been a huge part of that first line. You take that away from Landeskog, and it's just not the same. So they got to. I'm really hoping as an Avalanche fan that they figure something out soon so that he doesn't get picked up.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the thing is, I don't think he can drive his own line offensively. Landeskog is And once again, not to shit on Landeskog, because I'll even on the opposite side, like you said, I think Colorado would want to re-sign him because Landeskog is the defensive key of that lineup.
Absolutely.
He's on that line. He's very good defensively, and he's a very responsible two-way player. Which is why I don't think he's worth $8 or $9 million, because I don't think he can drive the offense on his own line in the way that McKinnon can just create goal scoring opportunities out of nothing. So I think he's like a very, very talented complementary piece. So on a team like Seattle, I don't think that's the right pick because you're looking for players who can drive their own line. I don't see Landeskog being that guy, especially not wanting to commit $8 or $9 million. And with Donskoy and Comfer right there, I think you just pick Donskoy and you move on.
It's funny, when I first became an Avalanche fan, well, when I first went and watched them years ago, I always thought McKinnon was the captain because he's the best player on that team. So that just goes to show that when your alternate captain is mistaken for the captain, there's probably a problem there with the captain. But anyways, let's move on to Columbus. Who do you have, Lab?
Yeah, so this is interesting. There are a couple of thoughts because according to Steve Dangle, Seattle is not going to take Max Domi because he only has 1 year left on his contract and he's going to be injured for most of the season.
Mm.
Now, when you say that, that sounds like a fair enough reason to avoid picking him. But looking at the players that you can pick on Columbus, I don't really like any of the other options that they have. I mean, I suppose there's Dean Kukon as a defenseman, but there's nothing really special about him. And then there's Cliff Poo, who is another one of these guys you've probably heard as a prospect for the last couple of years. But now he's 23 years old and he still really hasn't broken out yet. So, in my mind, even if Max Domi is going to be injured most of the season and only has 1 year left, I think his potential trade value when he comes back healthy is worth more than picking a Cliff Poo or a Dean Kukon. So I still think Seattle should pick Max Domi. Whether he plays for them or not is a different story, but I think they should pick him purely for trade value and no other reason. Because you're telling me that when Max Domi comes back healthy and we're leading into the trade deadline, that teams aren't going to be willing to give up first round draft picks in order to bring a guy like Max Domi into their lineup as a rental. They absolutely will be willing to do that. And I think purely on that reason alone, they have to be taking Max Domi.
Well, it would be the smart decision. I agree, but um, yeah, I know what. I agree. Max Domi should be picked, and like you said, a healthy Max Domi has a lot of upside trade potential. So if Domi's able to get healthy and go through all these surgeries and come back next season potentially as sign him to a 1 year deal and trade him. Get some great young pieces to that team that depending on how the season goes may or may not be needed.
Absolutely. And I mean, obviously, the whole point of this expansion draft is to be able to build a team to put on the ice for season number one. But I've said it before in this episode, and I'll say it again. Asset management is so important in the league, especially with the salary cap not moving, and especially with a team like Seattle gets to start from scratch. There are obviously bad things about starting from scratch. You're not going to get any elite level players like a McDavid or a Crosby, and you're going to have to build your prospect pool like from literally nobody. But it's also a plus in terms of you don't have any bad contracts, you don't have any sort of negative things to bring on, and so bringing on a guy like Max Domi just purely for the trade value is showing that you're using asset management properly, and it's all about being able to have positive assets, and Max Domi is definitely that. Moving on to Dallas, who are you looking at for the Stars?
This may be an unpopular opinion, but I am not picking up Ben Bishop. I am picking up Blake Como because he has been proven season after season. He may be older, but you need that veteran experience on your team. Ben Bishop was injured the entire season last year. There is no way in hell I'm going to have that player on my team. He's a liability, and who knows how he's going to play after his injury, right? Like, I don't know if he's even going to be the goalie he was before. That's why I'm picking Como because I have a few goalies later on that I want to add to the team. So not Bishop, but I'm going with Blake Como. Or even Andre Sekera is a good choice too.
I agree with you on the first half. I also don't have Ben Bishop. I agree with you in terms of I immediately figured out who I wanted in the net, and committed to those goalies right away.
Hmm.
But similar to Buffalo, which obviously Dallas and Buffalo are in very different situations. But when I look at the players who are available, I don't really see a player that I can slot into my team immediately, or looking at an asset management. Like Sami Vatanen is unavailable, but he's a unrestricted free agent right away, so that's just a waste of a pick. Andre Sekera, he's got 1 year left at 1.5 million, which is definitely a plus. And maybe if you're trying to go win now, I think Sekera would be a strong pick. But at 35, I don't see a future there. So I'm taking Julius Honka.
Oh, Honka, that's a
I
great
know
decision.
I know at 25 he's not a prospect anymore, but Honka did play in the NHL, I believe, the last few seasons. He's been very borderline. So for me, I have Honka. He's a restricted free agent. He'll sign a cheap deal, and he can be a not that the taxi squad's going to be a thing anymore, because I don't think it will be going into next season, but he'll be that taxi like squad sort of player where he'll be your top pairing in the minors, and then if you get into injury trouble, or for whatever reason you need to fill a defensive slot, he can move up and he will not be out of place in the NHL. So that's why I'm leaning towards Julius Honka.
Which is an excellent choice. He's younger than Como and Sekera, and he brings a lot to the table. I agree with you. That's actually a good decision.
Thank you. Detroit, I'm going to be very quick. I think there's really only one pick that you can make, and it's Troy Stecher.
Stetcher?
Stetcher, yeah.
I'm actually gonna go with Vlad Nemestikov. I think he had a I
Interesting.
think he had a very good again, a Stetcher defenseman. No, he's
Yeah,
not.
yeah, he is.
He
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
right?
he is. I guess you're right. If I had to pick a forward, it would be Nemestikov, and it wouldn't be close compared to everyone else.
No.
I just see Stetcher at $1.7 million as a defenseman. That's a steal. But no, Nemestikov's a very solid forward option. If I needed to fill a slot at forward, I'd definitely look his way.
Well, absolutely. I would like Stetcher has been excellent for that team, and I guess like if you're looking for defensemen, he's an absolute he's a steal. Yeah, like you said, that's a great contract. 1.7, that's nothing for a defenseman. So it can go either way. If they're looking for a forward, they get Nemestikov defenseman. They should go Stetcher.
Absolutely. Who do you have on Edmonton? Obviously, James Neal. We can move on.
Mikko Koskinen, what? Um, I think I would have maybe Devon Shore. It's funny to think that Stuart Skinner was protected over Koskinen because Koskinen is that bad. I think Devon Shore needs a fresh scenery change. He didn't have much playing time on Edmonton last year, but I think if you give him the nice exposure he needs, bottom six, you could even put him, you could put him in the fourth line, but I think he brings more to the table than a lot of people will admit. So I think having Devon Shore picked up would be the best choice out of all teams. Out of all players here, I think he's the best option.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think for me, it comes down to two options. I think if you want a guy who's more NHL ready that you can slot into your bottom six, Devon Shore. If you want to go a little bit more of a younger prospect route, you go Tyler Benson. They're two very similar players. They're depth wingers. Shore is just 4 years older, more NHL ready. Benson is 23, more of a thought for the future. But I think they fill a very similar spot, just in different. In terms of different NHL availability. If you want that player immediately, you go Devon Shore. He's only making $700,000 for 2 more years. It's a slam dunk, no risk on the contract. So actually, the more I think about it, I don't think there are really any downsides to picking a guy like Devon Shore into your team. So yeah, no, I think that's a very safe option. And to your point about Stuart Skinner being protected over Mikko Koskinen, we go back to it, asset management. Mikko Koskinen at $4.5 million at the age of 33. When you look at the other goaltending options that are available in this draft, Edmonton are very confident that the Seattle Kraken want nothing to do with Mikko Koskinen, and so they're protecting their young goalie, which I think is a very smart move. And I can't believe I'm giving Ken Holland and the Edmonton Oilers credit, but they got that right. They
Yeah, well,
got
that's
that right.
one thing out of how many?
Yeah, exactly. Moving on to Florida. I think this is very easy, not just because it's the pick that makes the most sense, but also Elliot Friedman is reporting that Seattle are literally almost finalizing contract
Yeah.
talks with him. So Chris Drieger, 3 years, 3.5 million. It's a very smart pick. Obviously, he's still not a proven NHL goalie. He's literally only played 1 year, but at only $3.5 million at only 3 years, obviously we'll talk about the other goalies that they'll pair him with, but he definitely isn't going to be relied upon completely. I assume the other goalie you have, it's going to be a 50-50 splitting the crease situation. Drieger is a very low risk at that contract, and he's a very smart pick for them to make, getting our first goalie into the team.
Yeah, he played very well with Florida last year. Like you can't really ask for much. He was one of the better goalies for Florida with Bobrovsky's inconsistency. He picked up the slack.
Absolutely. When you're playing him instead of a goalie that you're paying $10 million a year, he's doing something right. It's just a matter of, is he going to find that consistency? Obviously, we've seen goalies have a very hot streak for a very short period of time. It's a matter of, can he be that long-term consistent guy? But with the contract that he's going to be signing and with the other goalies that will be around him, which I will get into later, I don't think it's a mistake here picking up Chris Drieger.
Absolutely. What's the next one, man?
So we have the Los Angeles Kings. I guess I'll go first.
Yeah.
Very similar. I don't see any players who I'm confident putting in immediately. I did look at Austin Wagner. I will say that. I did look at Brendan Lemieux. I will say that. But when I look at the players that I have in my lineup, I like the lineup that I have. So I'm looking more towards the future with this pick. I'm picking Kale Clegg,
Wow.
which is probably way off the board because I imagine you went Wagner or Lemieux, which also makes a lot of sense.
I actually didn't.
Ooh, Andreas Athanas. Don't tell me you went Oli Mata.
I went Anthony. I went Jonathan Quick. No, I'm just kidding. Anthony. I thought about Quick for a second because I'm like, he's been asked to do a lot and he's had all that pressure on him, but he's old and he's injured, so not happening. But no, I'm going Anthony. He showed he was excellent on Detroit, and I just think I think a lot of these players just need a new scenery, just need a fresh scenery change. So you can definitely go Lemieux, Lazard, or even whoever the hell you pick, but ultimately, I don't think the choice is bad between the three of them or four of them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really great options with the LA Kings. And Andreas Athanasiou is definitely I looked long and hard at that pick. Actually, in my initial version, I did pick Andreas Athanasiou. Obviously, has an expired contract, but it's restricted free agency, so Seattle would get exclusive rights with negotiating that contract. 26-year-old center, like you said, after leaving Edmonton, he had a phenomenal season in Detroit, obviously moved over to LA. Obviously, he's Greek Canadian, so I gotta support my boy.
Rep the Greek, man.
Yeah, but no, I think that would be whether you went Brendan Lemieux, Andreas Athanasiou, or Austin Wagner. All three of those players have a definite ability to slot into the lineup. I just really like Kale Clegg as a defensive prospect, so that's why I went with him. I'm fully aware that I don't think that's who they are going to pick or who they probably should pick, but I just wanted to shout out Kale Clegg more than anything. I'll let you take the reins on Minnesota.
I think they're gonna take. This is my third goaltender. I think it's Capo Kakkonen. I think he showed last year he's an excellent backup, and with the right training and the right mentorship under who I think the starting goalie will be, he's going to be able to do well. Like he showed, he was excellent with Minnesota last season. I think there's no question about that. He definitely showed his potential and had one of the best records. He was in Calder Trophy contention for a long time. So I think it's not a one-off. I think he's actually got a lot of potential to him, and I think as my third goaltender, that's who it is.
Ooh, so that I was gonna say. So you have Drieger as your backup or 1B, and Kakkonen as your third goalie.
Correct.
Ooh, very interesting to see who your starting goalie is, especially with the Montreal Canadiens up next. Yeah, so I have two very similar versions of my draft. In the first one, I picked Kakkonen, exact same with you. I had Drieger as my second goalie. I had Kakkonen as my third goalie. In my other version, though, I picked Nick Bukestad.
Which is
He's got
yeah.
1 year left at $2 million. It's a very low risk deal. And once again, asset management. I think that Nick Bukestad can fill a third line center, fourth line center role for this team immediately in a win now mode. And he's a phenomenal in faceoffs, phenomenal penalty killer. I remember from his time with the Penguins, he did both of those very effectively. He's only 29 years old. If it doesn't work out, there's definitely a market for a guy like that in the trade market around the deadline. Teams looking to fill the depth center position. So for that reason, I think that if they don't go Kakinen in net, which I think would be a very smart pick for them goalie wise, if they were to pick a skater outside of the crease, Nick Bukestad's a good option for them as well.
Yeah, that was my next pick, was Nick Bukestad in forward.
So, the Montreal Canadiens and the news that Carey Price is left available. And so this is going to open up a whole bag of worms discussion here about, do you take Carey Price, do you not take Carey Price? And, well, I guess I'll answer it first by saying, for me, I picked Brett Kulak. 27-year-old defenseman, only making $1.8 million. In the playoff run, he was a phenomenal shutdown defenseman. He played really well. I think he fits into either the second or third D pairing on the Seattle team for me. And so I go with that off of salary cap. And just to mention Carey Price, this is no disrespect to who he is as a talented guy. It's just that contract through to 2026 is... I'm not a fan of the length of that contract because he's already 33 years old. So you're talking about paying this guy $10.5 million until he's 38. And we talk about asset management, and the reality is that's a bad contract to take on if you're the Seattle Kraken. This is not a discussion about Carey Price's talent or his ability. I just don't like paying him that much money when he's 36, 37, 38 years old, especially when we've seen him struggle in the regular season when he's got a large workload. Now, you could argue if you pick up a Carey Price and also have a Drieger and a Kakinen alongside of him, you can ease off his load. I fully understand that argument. I just think if you also have Drieger and Kakinen and a third goalie that I will name later, I don't see what's the point in picking up these young goalies if you're going to commit to Carey Price for 5 more years. And I think that I'd rather put my trust in 3 younger goalies and trust them to develop and work as a tandem than it is for me to put all my eggs in one basket with Carey Price. So that's why I go Brett Kulak.
Carey Price is my starting goaltender. And I think it's hard to argue because this is a goaltender who took his team single-handedly to the finals last year. And yes, it's an ugly contract, but that's the only ugly contract on the team. And so I can live with that if I'm Ron Francis. I can say, you know what, Carey Price is still playing like Carey Price can. And so I'm gonna take a chance and a gamble on him to assume he's gonna play the way he's been playing, and I'll take this contract. It's a heavy load, but I'll take it. And I think
that's a good point. It's if it's your only really high paying contract, and it's not a bad contract now. It won't be a bad contract for a couple more years. So yeah, no, I can see your argument.
That's why my 3 goaltenders are Kakinen third, Drieger second, and Price first. Because you said you're gonna name a goaltender later, but you need that mentorship. You need a Carey Price to teach these goaltenders how to do. You need that veteran leadership. And that's what Price brings, and he brings skill, and that's my goaltending trio.
Yeah, the one thing I will say, and I think it speaks to why Montreal was so keen to protect Jake Allen, is Carey Price, well, any goalie who's 33 years old or greater. We saw, I think, the same thing with Henrik Lundqvist and these tremendous goalies. Henrik Lundqvist, in his prime with the Rangers, was literally playing 70 games this season.
Yeah.
You can't do that. And the one good thing about your goalie trio is Price and Drieger can split the crease like 41-41.
Yep.
So you're not really leaning on Carey Price in the regular season, and that might do wonders for his numbers and his ability to perform. And then, obviously, we all know what Carey Price did in the playoffs. So yeah, once again, it's very hard for me to not take Carey Price. But like I said, I mean, I prioritize more youth, more salary cap space, and also now with the reports about going to see a specialist in New York, now that could 100% just be Bergevin trying to play chess, and there's actually nothing wrong, and he's just trying to seed more uncertainty with Seattle, which is probably what's actually going on, and there's nothing wrong with Carey Price.
Probably.
But, and I mean, the more I think about it too, obviously Carey Price he's from Vancouver. He played his junior hockey in Washington State. His wife is from Washington State. He loves it out west, and probably part of the reason why he agreed to move his no trade clause is because he would not mind going to Seattle and living there. And also we talk about the ability to market a guy. You know how many Carey Price jerseys would sell in Seattle, and how many Seattle Carey Price jerseys would sell elsewhere in North America?
And there's a huge First Nations Indigenous population there too that he 100% wants recognition for, and he'd be maybe a spokesperson for them.
Absolutely, you've already seen him do that. Already start with that. He made a statement, I believe today or yesterday, about the residential school situation, which is great. Obviously, he's part. He has some part.
His mother is something. I don't know exactly what it is, but she's a chief.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see it happening. But yeah, so there you go. Carey Price is your starting goalie. Moving on to, I believe maybe we don't have the same pick, but I imagine you didn't go Matt Duchene or Ryan Johansson in Nashville.
I did
especially
not,
because you mentioned how Carey Price is your only bad contract. So based on that information, who did you go?
I went Calle Yarncroke. I like him. I've been watching him, and I watched him during the last few seasons. A lot of people in Toronto don't really care about Nashville. I think he's looked really good. I think Calle Yarncroke is your pick here, and I think you can go Mark Borowitzki, who was a former Senator and who had lots of upside. You could go Colton Sissons, Nick Cousins. I just think Calle Yarncroke is the best of those picks in my opinion.
Absolutely. I exactly went Calle Yarncroke as well for those exact same reasons. Completely agree. Don't really have too much to add on that. So I'll move on to the New Jersey Devils.
Oh, God.
Where PK Subban, obviously, what a stud. No, the fact that there are articles out there like, should Seattle take a chance on PK Subban? No, he makes $9 million, and he is not a $9 million player anymore. PK Subban should have never, Montreal trading PK Subban killed his career without them realizing it. He was a stud on Montreal, and he's never really recovered ever since. I'm a huge fan of PK Subban, the human being, phenomenal guy. I really hope he returns to some kind of elite hockey form, but I just don't see it happening. So I'm picking Will Butcher, young defenseman, 26, $3.7 million cap hit. He can run a power play from defense, and a lot of the defensemen that I have in my team are very stay-at-home, defensive-minded players. So Giordano and Will Butcher are going to be the two puck-moving, power play, offensive-minded defensemen on my team.
It's hard to argue that. I would say Andreas Johnsson because I know he has a lot of potential from Toronto. But now I'm thinking about it, Will Butcher is a good pick. He's young. He's got a nice contract, nice and easy, not too much for Seattle to worry about. So I'm going to go from Johnsson to Butcher. I'm going to agree with you on this one.
Yeah, Johnsson was the other player that I had my eye on. It was definitely between the two of them, but I've been picking a lot of forwards, and the reason why is because I had Will Butcher on my blue line the whole time, and it allowed me to go with forwards elsewhere. But yeah, Andreas Johnsson, I think, is the other potential pick. I really do think that it's going to be one of those players that Seattle are going to take for sure. The New York Islanders, there are some very interesting options here. I'm very interested to see who you went with.
I went with Josh Bailey because Bailey has been proven to be a playoff contender, a playoff player, and honestly, there's not the worst contract out there. So, Josh Bailey is the guy I go with.
Yeah, like I said, I have two different versions of my draft. I have Jordan Eberle in one of them. Although now that I think about it, maybe Josh Bailey's a better option. I just think Jordan Eberle's more of a consistent scorer, where Josh Bailey's more of a two-way power forward type of player, which obviously both have their merits. I just, For me, I have Eberle in order to drive some offense on this team. Bailey's another excellent pick. But in my second team, I have Sebastian Aho. Not Carolina Sebastian Aho, New York Islanders defenseman Sebastian Aho.
Yeah.
He's got 1 year left at 725,000, and then he's a restricted free agency. And I think that he's ready for the NHL. You can slot him into your bottom six. I have him on my third D pair alongside Brett Kulak of Montreal, that I just mentioned earlier. So that's my pick on the Islanders. And like I said, I have two versions based on the defenseman that I picked. Those two versions are dependent on what decision I'd make with another team coming up very soon that we will get to. So if I need a defenseman, Aho. If I need a forward, either Bailey or Eberle, but I went with Eberle because of the more offensive-minded scorer.
Fair enough. And now we're on to the other New York team in the Rangers. Who did you pick here? I had trouble picking one here.
Yeah, for me, it came down to Julien Gauthier or Colin Blackwell.
Mm-hmm.
And I went with Julien Gauthier just because restricted free agent versus unrestricted free agent. That's literally the only reason.
That's literally the same reason I had Gauthier as well. There's literally not much the Rangers have to unprotect. So, what's the next one, man?
Yeah, moving on to the Ottawa Senators. Now, this is going to be very interesting. So I will go first because I know for a fact that you didn't pick this player because you already have all of your goalies. And for those of you keeping track at home, I've only picked one goalie so far, Joey Daccord,
I knew you would
as my third goalie on the Ottawa Senators.
Interesting. That's an interesting pick. I went Dadonov. I went with Genny Dadonov. I think, he was really good for Florida a few years back, and obviously Ottawa didn't have a great year. But their second half of the season, Dadonov was unreal. He was great. He was fantastic. So wow, Joey Daccord as your second goaltender or your third?
My third goalie. So I have Drieger splitting the crease with a goalie that I haven't mentioned yet. Although for those of you keeping track at home, I think you probably actually maybe you don't. There are still some goalie options out there, but I think most of you probably know who I'm leaning towards in net when we get to that team. But yeah, as my third option, Joey Daccord, obviously 24 years old. He's got 2 years left at $750,000, then a restricted free agent. He's the type of player where I can play him in the AHL immediately and continue to grow him into a role. Let's say Drieger doesn't work out, I have that guy in behind. If I had to pick a non-goalie on this team, I was thinking Vitaly Abramov as a young attacking player. Dadonov's cool. I just don't like that $5 million cap hit.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've been prioritizing salary cap, so for that reason, I'd steer clear. Although I say that, transitioning into the Philadelphia Flyers.
Yeah, and then
James Van Riemsdyk is my pick.
It's not
might sound crazy,
but it's not a bad pick.
But he's got 2 years left at $7 million, which is a lot.
Yeah,
I still think that's a movable contract because James Van Riemsdyk, even from his time on the Toronto Maple Leafs that you can speak to, he never was the star player, but he did the important things. He did the dirty work, and he did the things that go unnoticed that you need for a winning team. He can contribute on the power play. He can contribute on the penalty kill. He's a good two-way player. He's an aggressive player. He can fight. He can hit. He'll be in the corners. He'll do all of that stuff, and he can definitely still produce consistent offensive numbers. I know the $7 million is a big cap hit, but he is my, we'll get into it. He's either my highest paid or second highest paid player, depending on which version you look at on my team. And I still think that at, only 30, he's 32, but only 2 years left. I think it's a movable contract. Asset management, it's not the worst. If it doesn't work out, you only have him for 2 years. So I do go James Van Riemsdyk.
The only reason I picked James Van Riemsdyk as well is because what I would do is I'd trade him for young picks for a team who has a lot of cap space, and get some good young picks in return. So that's why I picked Van Riemsdyk. Yeah, it's $7 million for 2 years, but it's only 2 years and he's still producing. Like, put him with the right players, and you have a good old Toronto Maple Leafs Van Riemsdyk, and I think that's what will happen.
Absolutely, and like you said, definitely still has trade value. I also looked at Shane Gostisbehere, but
Yeah.
as someone who watched the Flyers play a lot because they played the Penguins 8 times this past season, and I did also watch them play a couple of games. I watched them with those games against Buffalo when Buffalo was about to break the longest losing streak record. Um, Gostisbehere, I don't know what happened to him, but he is just fallen off. And for $4.5 million for 2 more years, that's to me more risky because I don't know which version of Shane Gostisbehere I'm going to get, but I do know the version of James Van Riemsdyk that I'm going to get, which
And
I
the
think is what we've both been saying.
and Gothisbehere was scratched a few times last season too, which doesn't help his cause.
Absolutely. Moving on, I will let you pick first from my team. I'm interested to see who you take from the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Now I had one of two players. I had either Brandon Tanev or Jason Zucker, which is two extremely great talents. But Marcus Pettersson, I still think has a few more years before he reaches his peak. Um, and Zucker and Tanev have both proven themselves to be, well, excellent players. So I think that's who they'll. I think they'll pick one of those two.
Being perfectly honest with you, as a Penguins fan, if Seattle takes Jason Zucker, I am so happy.
Oh wow.
I'm totally fine with getting rid of Jason Zucker just because I think he's very replaceable. Tanev, I'm less happy about because I loved his presence on our bottom six, but at the end of the day, Brendan Tanev is essentially a fourth line winger and a penalty killer. I can replace that. Marcus Pettersson, to be honest, I don't know why Penguins fans hate Marcus Pettersson so much. The guy's a very solid young defenseman. And like you said, he still hasn't hit his peak, but he was pretty good this past season. And I know $4 million is a lot, but it's also not really. And we have him for 4 more years. So I could really see Seattle being very enticed by Marcus Pettersson. Here's the player that I would be so livid if they take. Zach Aston Reese.
Mm.
Which I know sounds stupid because you're like, well, you were just talking about how you'd be happy if Jason Zucker left or Marcus Pettersson left. Zach Aston Reese is your fourth line left winger, and you were talking about how fourth liners are very replaceable. Yes. Also, did you know, and I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, did you know that Zach Aston Reese, from an analytics perspective, was the best defensive forward in the NHL last 2 years running? I mean, analytically, he was the best at preventing offensive scoring opportunities by all forwards in the entire NHL the last 2 seasons.
But
That can't be
analytics only take you so far.
true, but that can't be replaced. Literally the number one defensive forward in the NHL from a statistics perspective, that can't be replaced because he's literally number one. I would be devastated if we lost Zach Aston Reese. I would be devastated if a week from today we don't have Jared McCann or Zach Aston Reese, and instead we have, I can't even remember that fucker's name that we traded for.
Oh, the McCann trade?
Yeah.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Exactly. If we lose Zach Aston Reese and Jared McCann, and all we have to show for it is that Swedish draft pick and a 7th-round pick, I'll be so livid. Yeah, I hope it's Jason Zucker. I really do hope it's Jason Zucker. Obviously, I would pick Zach Aston Reese if I was Seattle because I've watched Penguins hockey, and I understand the value that Zach Aston Reese has on this team. You slot Zach Aston Reese into your bottom six and on your top line penalty kill, and your team instantly is a better defensive team. It just is.
Fair enough. And let's move to San Jose then, yeah?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, paired with Zach Aston Reese on that fourth line, I have Dylan Gambrell at center. 1 year left at $700,000. Then he's a restricted free agent. You could easily get him re-signed. I also looked at Ryan Donato as a potential option, but he's a current restricted free agent. You'd have to sign him right now. And I really do like Dylan Gambrell. Obviously, I can't say I've watched a lot of San Jose hockey, but Dylan Gambrell is going to be quite a very solid player in the NHL, and that's who I would pick.
I agree. I picked Graham Gambrell. I also kind of had Matt Nieto for kind of that veteran experience, but I think Gambrell and the contract he has makes the most sense.
All right, now moving on to St. Louis. Now, this is where I have my biggest dilemma because to me, I think it comes down between Tarasenko or Vince Dunn.
Absolutely.
because Vince Dunn is a tremendous defenseman. I don't think he gets talked about enough. He's a very good player. And yes, he's a restricted free agent, but I think you could easily re-sign Vince Dunn in the Chris Drieger money range. I reckon you could get him for probably about $3.5–4 million a year. And he would slot right into your top four defense, and I think that would be a great addition. But then Vladimir Tarasenko is available. And we talked about last week, so I'm not going to repeat the same talking points, but essentially it's a matter of, do you trust that shoulder is okay?
Yeah.
And if you do, I don't see how you can't take him. So in my mind, I have Dunn in one of my drafts, and I have Tarasenko in my other draft. To me, and not to skip ahead, but Tampa Bay is the next team, and for me, that pick is very easy. So I will say, to me, the prospect of James Van Riemsdyk, Yanni Gourde, and Vladimir Tarasenko as your first forward line as an expansion team is very hard to turn down,
Absolutely.
especially if you think it's the Vladimir Tarasenko of old.
I just
So go ahead.
it's
Yeah.
it's so hard to say if his shoulder's 100. He's had so many surgeries and he's such a liability. Like, this is why I didn't choose someone else because of their injury. Um, I'm gonna go with Vince Dunn. I don't think there's really an argument there. Tarasenko, like, if he is 100%, like you said, I also had Gord in my first line. Um, you just That's a disgusting first line for your first expansion team. So, um, yeah, I realistically I'm going with Dunn because he's a top four defenseman, and defense are incredibly hard to find. And Tarasenko is just too much of a liability to me. It's not a risk I can take.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair enough. I think it really does come down between Tarasenko and Dunn, and I don't think there's really a wrong answer. I think if Seattle gets Dunn and is able to sign him to a contract, they're getting a very solid young defenseman to slot into that top four. And we both have Giordano, we both have Butcher. If you add Vince Dunn to that, that's a pretty formidable defensive partnership. And there's another defenseman that I'd imagine we're both picking later on to complete that top four. We both have Yanni Gourde on Tampa Bay.
See,
I'll let you speak about him for a little bit before we move on.
this was tough. This was a really tough choice between Gord, Palat, and Killorn. Um, like Tampa Bay, like you pick any one of those three players and you pick up a great player. But I think if you look at James Van Riemsdyk in the front net presence on the power play, I don't think you need Killorn for that. I think you need Yanni Gourde to bring his speed to that first line, like you said, or second line, depending on who you want to put on that first or whatever. But yeah, I'm Palat. Like, Palat is so good too. Like, this is like a gold mine for players. But I ended up going with Gord because I think that Gord brings the most potential out of all those players.
Yeah, completely agree with you. Like you said, considering we both have James Van Riemsdyk, if you look at it from a team building perspective, Van Riemsdyk is that power forward. If you want to, sort of generalize, Yanni Gourde is that very speedster, has a good shot, can play make. And the two drafts that I have, so in what, like I talked about with New York, I was split between Eberle at forward or Aho on defense. It's because for me, if you pick Eberle, I think you pick Vince Dunn. If you pick Sebastian Aho, I think you pick Tarasenko. In my mind, that's the switch that I had. So on either of my versions, that first line is either JVR Gourde Tarasenko or JVR Gourde Eberle. And I think in both instances, that's a tremendously talented first line that can score and still be competent enough defensively. Moving on to Toronto, I'll go first this time.
Yeah, you go first. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
So we do have the whole rumor of there was a video leaked of Seattle announcing Alexander Kerfoot as their pick. Now, the official Seattle Kraken Twitter account made a joke about it saying, oh, we have like 5 different versions of that clip with 5 different players. Whether you believe that or not is a whole nother situation. It does seem as if they're picking Alexander Kerfoot. I don't see how you don't pick Jared McCann. He can play wing, he can play center, he can score, power play, he's got speed, he can contribute literally. He's a Swiss Army knife. You can literally slot him anywhere in your lineup and he'll get the job done. I'm devastated as a Penguins fan that we traded him. Really thought we should have protected him instead of Jeff Carter. It makes zero fucking sense to me. I understand why Toronto would leave McCann and Kerfoot exposed to protect some of their defensemen. Obviously, they protected the 4 defensemen route, and for Toronto, it's fine because you'll have one or the other. You can't lose both, and so I think Toronto are definitely in a better situation because they'll have the other guy who Seattle doesn't take. I think it comes down to Kerfoot or McCann. I just really love Jared McCann. I pick him and slot him. I actually move him to center. He can play the center position even though he's listed as a left winger. That's who I have, although I know you're a big Alexander Kerfoot fan, so I'll throw it over to you to make the case for Kerfoot.
Yeah, when I saw that video, that kind of like confirmed my suspicions. I knew Kerfoot. I think Kerfoot's still going to get picked up. He had an absolutely tremendous, some of his best play since he was a rookie in the Avalanche or when he was playing with Colorado. Um, God, man, if we lose Kerfoot, I'm gonna be devastated. It's like McCann to you to Pittsburgh, Kerfoot is to Toronto. I'll be devastated. And like you said, we're in a good spot because you can't pick both. You got to pick one or the other. So I'm hoping they take McCann because I really, really like Kerfoot. But like you said, like you can move McCann over to the center spot, and there's your third line center. So either way, we kind of win in a sense. Like we lose, but we also win because we have a replacement for whoever does get picked up there. So I think that they'll pick Kerfoot. I think they'd be smart to pick Kerfoot, but I wouldn't be surprised if they picked McCann as well. But I just think Kerfoot has just been it's a friendly contract. You can move him up to second line. He'll get second line minutes. He deserves it. And yeah, that's what I think they'll pick.
Yeah, either way, they're definitely getting a good player out of Toronto. A place where they might not get as good of a player is Vancouver. I'm interested to see what you went with there.
So the Canucks, I went with, oh man, it was hard because I was gonna go with Bertanen, but there's that whole sexual assault allegations going on with him. Braden Holtby, obviously I have my 3 goals. I went Matthew Highmore or Zach McEwen. I went one of those two. They're young, friendly contracts, and they have a lot of potential put with the right players. So I went with Highmore. I wouldn't be surprised if I switched to McEwen, but I think both of them have a lot of potential, and I think both of them will can do pretty well on Seattle.
You see, I'm very interested to know who you think I picked from Vancouver because obviously I still need a goalie.
I don't think you picked Holtby though.
Yeah, no, I didn't pick Holtby.
There's no way you picked Holtby. Holtby played tremendously bad.
Yeah, no, I did not pick Holtby. Although I'm thinking like obviously because there could be trades. I'm thinking if Vancouver's willing to give me like a couple of draft picks and retain half of his salary,
No,
then maybe Holtby's in the discussion.
no, I don't
But
think so because his numbers were statistically one of the worst of his career.
yeah, no, I definitely bury him under my other 2 goalies. But yeah, no, I looked at McHugh and I looked at Highmore. I agree that those are very good picks. I went even younger. I went Cole Lind.
Oh, jeez, you went like baby.
Yep. Yeah. He's literally a prospect. Like I'm letting him go back to like I'm going like I don't even know if he's still eligible to play in junior. I don't think he is because he is 22. But no, he's definitely like an AHL. Like I don't. Is he eligible to play in college still? I don't know. Anyways, he's definitely a for the future type of player because I don't see a way that I can improve my team currently. I have all of my lines already set. So for me, I do like McEwen, I do like Highmore, but why not go for a player who's even younger than they are?
Fair, which is reasonable. I just think if Seattle wants to compete, they got to compete now. They got to make a statement right off the bat, like Vegas did.
Yeah, very true. Very true. So Washington Capitals.
Oh my
Um,
God, that's a big list, man.
Yeah, well, I need my other goalie, and
It's
for those of you keeping track, I think it was very clear where I was going.
yeah,
Vitek
no
Vanacek,
shit.
he was honestly one of the first guys on my list. I watched a lot of him. I think he's a tremendous young goalie. Um, is it risky to split the crease between Drieger and Vanacek? I would completely agree if you were to say that that's a risk. I do think it is. I have faith in Drieger and Vanacek as a duo to get the job done. We saw Vanacek and Drieger both get limited playoff time. Obviously, it was unsuccessful playoff time with Washington and Florida both playing badly, but I would argue that it was not due to their performance. I think that the teams in front of them just didn't. Well, Washington, the team in front of them, played awful. Florida just ended up having to go through Tampa. I really like Vanacek. I think that he is the. I think he's a very. I think he's a slam dunk pick in my mind, and so he is my. I guess you can call him my 1A, Drieger's my 1B, but similar to what you have with the Price-Drieger situation, I have Vanacek and Drieger splitting the crease. If I had to guess, I would say you chose. Oh, I actually don't know because there's so many options.
Yeah. I'd like to see, take a one guess, because there's a few options there few former Penguins on there that have proven, so maybe I picked them, or you never
I was
know.
gonna say you didn't pick Connor Sherry. I really hope you didn't pick Connor Sherry.
No, I didn't pick Sherry, don't worry.
I think. Well, first of all, for those of you wondering why is Ovechkin left unprotected, it's because he's a free agent and there's no way in hell that he's signing with anyone other than Washington, so it would just be a waste of a pick.
Yeah.
I think you either went Nick. I think you went Nick Jensen.
You want to take another guess? I went with Brandon Dillon.
Brendan Dillon. Interesting. Okay.
Former San Jose Shark. Didn't get too much playing time there, but he's got a lot of upside. He does have a lot of upside, and he was a huge part to that, that Washington team last year. I look at all these other guys. I love Nick Dowd, he was good. Carl Hagelin, a little overrated. Connor Sherry, old. I look at Brendan Dillon, I'm like, that's a safe pick. That's a pick I know that I'm going to get some production out of, and honestly, I can't argue with myself when I say Brendan Dillon's the guy.
Absolutely. I think if I didn't pick Vanacek, I'd go Jensen just because $1.4 million less on the cap.
Fair.
But I can't disagree with Brendan Dillon. I think that would be a very, very strong pickup on the defense. Speaking of, English is hard. Speaking of strong pickups on the defensive end, moving to the final team, the Winnipeg Jets. Can we just both say Dylan DeMello on 3 and move on?
No, I actually went with someone else.
Oh, wow. Did you go Mason Appleton?
Mason Appleton.
Yeah. I think Mason Appleton's a real solid pick. And for those of you who remember, a couple of months ago, I want to say, I came out with a team of if I had to pick one player from each team. For me, I picked Mason Appleton on the Jets because I was a huge fan of his, and he's only on $900,000. Oh, but Dylan DeMello is a top 2 defenseman in my mind. I think Giordano and DeMello as your top D pairing is too good of an opportunity to pass up.
I like Appleton. I like his play, and I like the fact that he's younger, and sure, like maybe he's not as experienced, but man, under Giordano and Butcher and all those guys, like and Gardner, in my opinion, like that's a lot of leadership that you have there, and I think Appleton will probably at one point in his life be a top 2 defenseman.
You mean forward? Appleton.
Forward. My bad. Forward. Sorry, my bad. Yeah. I went with Appleton. And like you said, DeMello is a great choice too. Like if I were to pick another player, it would be him because he's like you said, top 4, top 2 arguably. Like
yeah, no, for sure. He's definitely a talented player. So that is all of the teams. Do you have like all of yours written down as like lines or anything? Or
no, I have not. I did, and then I lost it.
Yeah. No, fair enough. So the last thing I will say is, especially because for my team, like I said, I kind of prioritize the salary cap a little bit. Like I said, depending on which version of my teams I pick with a couple of small changes, they either have a cap hit of $66 million or $71.5 million, which, if you guys know, the salary cap is $81.5 million, meaning that this team of mine has some cap space. And the reason why I did that is because there's some potential free agents. And remember, Seattle is very entitled, just like every other team in the NHL is, to sign some free agents. And I know that we're going pretty long on this podcast, but I will just quickly highlight a couple of names and whether you think Seattle would go after them, or I think more so whether these players would want to sign in Seattle. So obviously, the top two free agents this season, well, I'm excluding Ovechkin because we're all under the assumption that Ovechkin is re signing in Washington.
Yeah.
Um, or else, obviously, Ovechkin is the biggest free agent name. But legit free agents who are going to test the market. You have Landeskog and you have Dougie Hamilton. Now, obviously, with my team's salary cap situation, they would be able to afford these guys. I don't see either of these guys wanting to sign with a new team.
No, I agree. I think Landeskog wants to sign with the Avalanche, and obviously Ovechkin probably wants to finish his career as a Capital. I can't see him signing with anyone else either.
Yeah, and I think Dougie Hamilton wants to go to a contending team.
Absolutely, I would want to as well. I mean, you could even re-sign with Carolina. They're still in very good contention, but you're right. If he goes anywhere, he goes to a team that needs that's still in contention.
Absolutely, and I think same thing with Ryan Suter.
Yeah.
There's definitely going to be a market for him. I think he wants to win. So I don't think he would go to Seattle. Now, a couple of players that I have benchmarked is I have Zach Hyman
Mm-hmm.
because we know Toronto can't afford him. I have Blake Coleman because we know that Tampa Bay can't afford him
Right.
as potential options to bolster their forward core. And then also, I really like Alexander Wenberg, free agent out of Florida. He's a centerman. And I really think that if a team goes in for Wenberg, they would be getting a tremendous player. And that's why I hope, especially Penguins losing Jared McCann and potentially losing another forward, I really hope that if Seattle picks Jason Zucker, that frees up $5.5 million in cap space, and with that cap space, we're able to re-sign Zach Aston Reese and then sign a guy like Alexander Wenberg in free agency to replace that depth down the middle. I'm a huge fan of Alex Wenberg, and I think he would be a very solid signing for any team, especially a new team like Seattle that could use some just a responsible, solid centerman.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think it's really hard to disagree with that. It's everything you've hit on, everything you've talked about. You hit on. You talked about. Just it just makes sense that way. It just absolutely makes sense. Exactly what you said.
And then the last thing I wanted to ask you about is for restricted free agents, not in terms of teams offer sheeting these guys, but teams potentially trading for their RFA rights. And because these are players who either are on teams that can't afford them or are in situations where they are not, I won't say valued, but situations where they might not be in the best spot with their current team.
Mhm.
That is Sam Reinhart in Buffalo.
Mm.
Now, this is not on Buffalo. This is on Sam Reinhart not wanting to be in Buffalo. And especially if Buffalo trade Jack Eichel, there is no reason for Sam Reinhart to be in Buffalo. So I would be very interested to see if a team is willing to trade for his restricted free agent rights. It's a very similar situation in I don't see how the Columbus Blue Jackets are re-signing Patrick Laine.
They
Now,
probably will because the general manager is Finnish and they have a good connection there.
I mean, I guess Tortorella is leaving as their head coach, so maybe there's an opportunity to repair the relationship.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe once again, they kind of have to re-sign him because they gave up Pierre-Luc Dubois, and I don't think he has a lot of trade value right now. But then two other players that came to mind for me are Connor Garland and Tyson Jost of Arizona and St. Louis. Not
Hmm.
because these teams don't want to re-sign them. I think obviously Arizona really want to re-sign Connor Garland, and I think Tyson Jost is valued by St. Louis. I just think that those are two young, talented players where you might look at an offer sheet situation, or you might look at a team trying to take a risk and try to trade for one of these guys.
I mean, yeah, Connor Garland should get saved from that team in Arizona. He's absolutely incredible, to be honest with you. He's probably their best player out of he's just probably their best player. So it sucks to see that guys like that are gonna get wasted.
Absolutely. And who knows? I mean, I know Arizona are actively shopping Ekman Larson, trying to free up cap space. And, obviously Connor Garland's going to get himself a decent contract. But it'll be interesting to see if that's in Arizona or if it is elsewhere. Speaking of trades, just because I also mentioned Buffalo, I wanted to ask you this. So apparently the asking price for Jack Eichel is 2 current NHL players, 2 prospects, and a first-round pick. What are your thoughts on that?
Like, that's ridiculous. Somehow Buffalo will still get fleeced that way. Ah, like, yeah, Eichel is worth that much. I think so. Maybe not that much, but like, I'm so sick of hearing all these Eichel trade rumors. Like, enough with the rumors. Like, get it done or don't, because these rumors are just going to affect and swirl around Eichel's head for the entire season. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, just trade for him or don't. I don't want to hear these stupid ass trade rumors.
And one final trade rumor is apparently there are talks of a potential Seth Jones trade to Dallas, where the return would be John Klingberg, which would be an absolute blockbuster of a trade if that was to happen.
I think it's a fair deal, though. I think it's 1-for-1, and I think they're both really good, honestly.
Yeah, I think they're very similar players. Klingberg, I think, is just 3 years older. Other than that, I think they're almost identical from a eye test perspective, from an analytics perspective, from a value perspective. That would be a huge deal. I think it would just be a matter of 2 defensemen who are apparent superstars but have really struggled just getting a change of scenery. So I agree with you. I don't think that would be the worst thing. But these are all things to consider going into Thursday at 1 p.m. when the roster freeze ends. And then, like we said, some big decisions to be made by the Seattle Kraken. Will some big names come off the board? Will we see Carey Price leaving Montreal? Will we see Vladimir Tarasenko leaving the St. Louis Blues? Will we see Mark Giordano leave the Calgary Flames? Will we see Gabriel Landeskog leave the Colorado Avalanche? We have some captains who might be on the move, which is huge. And if they don't pick Price, if they do pick Price, who will they trust in the crease? Who will the leadership look like? Who will the star players look like? All those questions will be answered in the next 48 hours. And we will be with you next week to break it all down. Until then, any closing thoughts, Jacob?
No, I think you wrapped it up very nicely there, Labi. Well done.
Thank you very much. But yeah, like I said, we'll be there next week to break it all down. But until then, thank you so much for listening. We'll see how accurate our expansion predictions are. Based on my track record, it'll be very wrong. But it'll give us more to talk about next week. But until then, this has been another episode of the Benchwarmers Sports Talk podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.